The town of Grendale was a place where time seemed to move a little differently. Some said it was because of the mountains that rose like grey shoulders around it, blocking the hurried winds of the outside world. Others claimed it was the river that curved lazily through the town center, rippling as if reluctant to rush anywhere. But those who lived there knew the true reason. It was because of the Clockmaker. His shop sat on the corner of Linden and Willow, a crooked building of stone and wood whose windows glowed faintly golden even when the night swallowed the streets. The sign above the door read simply, "Horologist." But everyone knew it was more than that. Inside lived Elias Wren, a man who had been mending clocks for longer than anyone could remember. Some whispered he had been there before their grandparents were born, though his face never seemed to age more than a season. His hair was silver, yes, but his back was straight, his hands nimble, and his eyes carried the peculiar sharpness of someone who counted seconds not as fleeting things but as companions. Children were told stories of Elias. They said he could stop time with a twist of his fingers. They said he could restart a heart with the gentle touch of a ticking watch. And late at night, when candles burned low and shadows grew bold, some told of clocks that hung in his workshop, clocks that didn't measure minutes or hours but measured something else entirely. Dreams. Memories. The years you had left to live. Few ever dared to ask Elias directly. He was kind, yes, always smiling with a warmth that softened even the sharpest suspicion. But he was also a man wrapped in silence, and in that silence lived secrets no one could quite name. His shop ticked endlessly with the rhythm of hundreds of clocks, some loud and brazen, some soft as whispers, all layered together until the sound was less noise and more like breathing. Step inside, and you would feel it. A strange calm, as though time itself sighed and settled. For many, the clocks were just clocks. Beautiful, yes, crafted with artistry, gilded hands, polished faces, wood carved with vines and constellations. Customers came to have them repaired, to buy gifts, to marvel at the craftsmanship. But there were always a few who came with heavier reasons. They came when nights grew too long or grief pressed too deep. They came when something inside them felt broken in ways that no doctor or priest could mend. And somehow, Elias always knew which clock to bring out from his back room. That was where the true magic lived. They said that on a fog-heavy autumn evening, when the leaves lay damp and crumbling along the cobblestones, a woman named Clara stepped into his shop. She was 35, though sorrow had pressed lines into her face that did not belong there. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the door behind her, the little bell above chiming like a small voice breaking silence. She had never been in Elias's shop before, though she had walked past it countless times, hearing the layered ticking spilling faintly through the walls. Tonight, however, something had drawn her in. Elias looked up from his workbench where he was bent over a pocket watch with a magnifying glass strapped to one eye. He removed it, set down his tools, and gave her a smile that carried both welcome and recognition, as though he had been expecting her. "Good evening," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the patience of someone who had never once hurried through a sentence. "The rain will begin soon. You came just in time." Clara hesitated. His words were strange, but his tone wrapped around her like a blanket. She stepped closer, her eyes drifting to the shelves where clocks of every size lined the walls. Each ticked differently, yet somehow together, as if they were in conversation with one another. She found herself listening so deeply she almost forgot why she had come. I lost something," she said finally, though the words felt uncertain even as they left her lips. Elias tilted his head. "Something, or someone?" She swallowed, her throat tight. "Myself." He nodded once, as though that answer made perfect sense, and rose to his feet. His movements were unhurried, precise, like the sweeping of clock hands. He studied her for a moment, not with pity but with understanding. Then he motioned toward the back of the shop. "Come," he said. "There is a clock for you." Clara followed him, her heart beating like one of the pendulums she passed. They entered a narrow hallway lined with taller clocks, each with faces that seemed to glimmer faintly in the candlelight. Some bore numbers she could read, others had no numbers at all, only strange markings that looked like constellations, or rivers, or even open eyes. The further they went, the more Clara felt the air change, thicker, heavier, as if each clock they passed carried not just time but something more. Finally, Elias stopped before a modest clock, no taller than a child. It was simple, built of dark walnut, its pendulum swinging slow and sure. Its face, however, was unlike the others. Instead of hours, it was divided into shades of light, dawn pinks, noon golds, twilight purples, midnight blues. The hands pointed not to numbers but to moments in a day. This one, Elias said softly. It keeps what you think you've lost. Clara stepped closer, her breath catching. As she stared at the clock face, she saw something flicker in the glass. For just an instant, her reflection wasn't the tired, hollow-eyed woman she knew. It was her younger self, laughing, her cheeks bright with color. The image faded, but it was enough to bring tears to her eyes. What is it? She whispered. Elias rested his hand on the clock, his fingers gentle, reverent. A reminder. A mirror. A guardian of your hours. It doesn't give back what is gone, but it shows you what remains. Clara reached out, hesitated, then touched the wood. The clock seemed to hum beneath her fingertips, warm and alive. For the first time in years, she felt her chest loosen, as though some invisible band around her ribs had slackened. She closed her eyes and let the steady ticking sink into her. When she opened them again, Elias was watching her, his expression unreadable yet kind. How much? She asked softly. That he smiled faintly. For you, no cost. Only a promise. You must listen to it every night before you sleep. Do not silence it. Let it remind you. Clara nodded, though she did not fully understand. She felt a pull inside her, a knowing that this clock was not meant to be bought like any other object. It was part of something larger, something she had stepped into the moment she walked through his door. He wrapped it carefully, placing it in her arms with surprising ease. Though it looked heavy, it felt light, as if it wanted to be carried. Clara thanked him, her voice trembling, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Elias spoke again. Time does not heal, Clara. But it reveals. You'll see. She looked back at him, startled. How did you know my name? But Elias only smiled, and the shop door clicked shut behind her. That night, Clara placed the clock on her bedside table. She wound it gently as Elias had shown her, and as the pendulum began to swing, she listened. Tick. Tock. Slow, steady, like a heartbeat. She fell asleep with tears still on her cheeks but with a strange warmth in her chest. Her dreams were different that night. For the first time in years, she dreamed of color. Word of Clara's visit spread quietly through Grendale, as such things always did. People noticed she walked a little straighter, that her eyes no longer carried quite so much shadow. They whispered that the clockmaker had given her something from his hidden collection, one of those clocks that carried more than just time. Some were skeptical, but many believed. And those who believed found themselves drawn to Elias's shop more than ever. One of them was a man named Thomas Hale, a widower who lived alone in a crumbling house at the edge of town. His wife had died many winters ago, and though he carried on with his work as a carpenter, his nights were haunted by silence. He visited Elias not with words but with weary eyes, and Elias greeted him without surprise. He led Thomas to a tall grandfather clock carved with roses along its frame. This one, Elias said. It keeps company. Thomas did not ask what he meant. He only bought the clock and carried it home. That night, as he sat in his dim living room, the clock began to chime. But the chime was not like any other clocks. It was a voice, soft, melodic, achingly familiar. It was his wife's laughter, captured in the ringing notes. Thomas wept, but he also smiled, and for the first time in years, he spoke aloud in his house, answering the echoes of her laughter with his own. The clock spread like seeds through Grendale. Each one was different, each one matched to the person who needed it. Some gave comfort, some gave courage, some gave warnings. And always, Elias knew exactly which clock to place in their hands, but with wonder came questions. Who was Elias Wren, truly? How did he know what people carried in their hearts? Why did he never change, never grow older? Though the decades slipped by, there were rumors, of course. Some said he was a man who had once bargained with time itself, trading his own years for the ability to mend those of others. Some whispered he was not a man at all, but a keeper, a guardian set to watch over the hours of the town. A few, darker still, claimed his clocks did not give but take, that every comfort he offered came at a cost hidden deep within the ticking gears. Clara did not know which to believe. All she knew was that her clock had changed her. Night after night, she listened, and night after night, her dreams grew brighter, her waking lighter. She began to paint again, something she had abandoned long ago when grief had hollowed her. Her canvases filled with color, with skies and rivers and faces she had once loved. People noticed, and they came to her, asking for paintings, and slowly Clara's house filled not with silence but with laughter again. Still, curiosity tugged at her. One rainy evening, nearly a year after she had first entered his shop, she returned. Elias was at his workbench, as always, a magnifying glass over one eye, his fingers deft as they coaxed life back into a broken timepiece. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "Your clock serves you well," he said without needing to ask. "Yes," Clara admitted. "But I need to know, what are they?" "Really?" Elias leaned back, folding his hands. For a long moment, he was silent, listening to the countless ticks around him. Then he spoke. "They are pieces of me," he said quietly. "Each one carries a fragment. A memory, a heartbeat, a moment I have lived. I give them away so others might remember what I cannot." Clara frowned. "You forget?" He nodded slowly. "To give is to lose. I no longer dream of certain days. Faces fade. But those who carry my clocks keep them alive." Her chest tightened. "That means, you're sacrificing yourself." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I am simply doing what I was made to do." Clara wanted to protest, to tell him it was unfair, but as she looked into his eyes she saw something infinite there, patience, sorrow, and a strange peace. She realized then that Elias Wren was not bound by the same rules as the rest of them. He was tethered to something greater, something older than the town itself. Before she could speak again, the shop door opened, and another customer entered, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Elias rose to greet them, and Clara knew the conversation was over. But his words lingered in her mind, deep and heavy as the ticking of his clocks. Outside, the rain fell harder, the river swelled, and the mountains loomed as they always had. And somewhere in the quiet, the clocks of Elias Wren kept ticking, each one carrying a secret, each one whispering a fragment of the man who gave them life. As the years slipped onward, the presence of Elias Wren became more mysterious. He was always there, always in his shop, his hands never slowing, his back never stooping. Those who had known him as children grew gray-haired, their own children now adults, but Elias never changed. He was constant, like the ticking that filled his shop, a heartbeat against the silence of time. Some found comfort in that constancy, while others found unease. Clara lived her days more fully than she had ever imagined she could again. The clock Elias had given her remained at her bedside, its pendulum still swinging steadily, marking her nights with its soft rhythm. The younger version of herself that had once flickered in its reflection no longer startled her. It had become familiar, like a companion reminding her of who she had been and who she still was beneath the weight of sorrow. She began to visit Elias more often, not always for answers but simply to sit among the ticking, to feel that strange calm. It was as though his shop existed outside the ordinary world, where pain softened and time did not wound quite as sharply, but not everyone who came to Elias did so for comfort. Some came out of desperation, carrying questions heavier than grief. One winter evening, when the snow piled high along the streets and the lamps burned dim through fogged glass, a man named Victor came to the shop. He was younger than Clara, but his eyes were old, desperate, and his steps carried the restless rhythm of someone chased by time. That he entered abruptly, his coat dusted white, and fixed Elias with a stare that held both pleading and accusation. "I've heard the stories," Victor said. "They say you can change what has already been. That you can turn back the hours." Elias regarded him with calm patience. "Stories grow wild in the mouths of those who need them most." Victor's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the counter. "My son." He was 7. A fever took him, sudden, cruel. "Don't tell me you can't, don't tell me there isn't a clock for this." For the first time Clara, who sat quietly in the corner sketching while Elias worked, saw the clockmaker's expression shift. Not pity, not sorrow, but something deeper. A weight. He rose slowly, moving to the shelves behind him, his fingers brushing over polished wood and gleaming brass. Finally, he stopped at a small clock, no larger than a fist. It was carved from bone-white ivory, its face delicate, its hands so thin they looked like strands of hair. Elias lifted it gently, almost reluctantly, and placed it on the counter. This clock does not return the past, he said, his voice quieter than usual. It only allows you to hear what was lost, for as long as it ticks. Nothing more. Victor's face tightened, his breath coming sharp. That's enough, he whispered. That's all I need. He reached into his coat, pulling out a pouch heavy with coins, but Elias shook his head. No, he said firmly. This one is not purchased. It is borrowed. And you must return it when the ticking stops. Victor seized the clock with desperate fingers, nodding quickly. He barely heard Elias's warning, nor did he look back as he hurried into the night. The little ivory clock ticked faintly in his grasp, fragile as a heartbeat. Clara waited until the door closed before she spoke. What will happen when it stops? Elias stood very still. His silver eyes seemed to look not at her, not at the room, but at something far beyond. He will learn that time's gift is not to be held but to be remembered. And the learning will hurt. Clara shivered. Days passed, then weeks. Word spread that Victor had locked himself away in his house, and at night, neighbors claimed they heard him speaking softly, laughing through tears, as though answering a voice no one else could hear. But then, one evening, the sound ceased. The next morning, the priest was called to his home, where Victor sat weeping beside the little ivory clock, its hands stilled forever. The grief was sharper than before, but some said his face carried a strange peace, as if for a brief while, he had been given back what he had lost. Clara returned to Elias's shop that night, unable to keep away. She found him at his bench, polishing the ivory clock with gentle care. Its hands remained frozen. He looked up at her and spoke as though to himself. Every clock has a price. Even if it is not paid with coin. The words lingered in Clara's mind. She began to wonder about her own clock, the one that brought her dreams and warmth. What had it cost Elias to give it to her? What had he lost in exchange? The questions haunted her more and more. And as the seasons turned, she noticed something she had not before. Though Elias's hair remained silver, though his back remained straight, there were shadows in his eyes that deepened each year. Sometimes, when he thought no one was watching, his hands would still over a clock, his gaze going far away, as though reaching for a memory he could no longer grasp. Clara realized with a sharp ache that the stories were true. Each clock he gave away was not simply crafted from wood and gears. It was a piece of himself, chipped away, gifted freely, never to return. One spring evening, she confronted him. The shop glowed with the soft light of oil lamps, shadows swaying across the walls of ticking faces. She stood before his workbench, her hands clenched. You can't keep doing this, she said. You're giving yourself away. Piece by piece. What will happen when there's nothing left of you? Elias looked up, his smile faint but unwavering. That is the way of time, Clara. We all give ourselves away, second by second, breath by breath. I merely do so more knowingly. But you, her voice broke, frustration and sorrow twisting together. You deserve more than to vanish into your clocks. He studied her, his eyes softening. Perhaps. But if vanishing leaves behind comfort for others, then it is enough. Clara wanted to argue, but the words dissolved on her tongue. His calm was unshakable, his acceptance absolute. She felt tears burning her eyes, but Elias only reached out, resting a gentle hand over hers. Do not grieve me yet, he murmured. There is still time. And so life in Grendale went on. The clocks spread further, their stories weaving into the fabric of the town. Children grew up listening to their lullabies, widows clung to their voices, dreamers followed their whispers. The town itself seemed protected, cushioned against the harshness of the outside world, but all things, even those touched by magic, come to a turning point. One summer night, the air heavy with heat, Clara woke to a silence that felt wrong. She lay in bed, her breath quickening, before she realized what was missing. Her clock. It had stopped. The pendulum was still. The hands no longer moved. The quiet pressed against her ears like a scream. She rushed to Elias's shop, the streets dark, the town asleep. When she burst through the door, the golden glow that always lit the windows was gone. The shop was dark, the air heavy. And for the first time in her memory, the ticking was silent, her chest clenched. She lit a lamp with trembling hands, its flame revealing rows upon rows of clocks, all still. Not one ticked. Not one chimed. The silence was unbearable. She found Elias at his workbench, his head bowed, his hands resting over an unfinished clock. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. He looked peaceful, as though merely sleeping, but Clara knew. She knew. The keeper of time had given away the last of himself. Tears blurred her vision as she touched his hand. It was cool, still. Around them, the silence grew deeper, heavier. She thought of all the clocks scattered through the town, each carrying a piece of him. Would they now stop, one by one? Would his gifts fade into nothing? But then, faintly, she heard it. A single tick. Then another. And another. Slowly, softly, the clocks around her began to stir, pendulums swinging, gears clicking. They did not fall silent. They did not die. Clara realized then what Elias had done. He had given himself away entirely, but not into nothingness. He lived now in every clock he had ever crafted, in every heartbeat they marked, in every dream they guarded. He had not vanished. He had become time itself within the town. Word spread in the days that followed. The people mourned Elias, yes, but their mourning was gentle, softened by the knowledge that he remained with them. Every chime was his voice. Every tick was his breath. And as long as his clocks ticked, Elias Wren would never be gone. Clara kept her clock close. She listened to it each night, not just for herself now but for him. She whispered to it, and sometimes, in the quiet, she thought she heard an answer, soft, steady, patient. Years later, when Clara herself grew old, she became the one who told the story. She told children of the man who had mended more than clocks, who had taught them that time did not heal but revealed. She told them of the night silence nearly swallowed the town, and of how it had been filled again by the ticking of 1,000 hearts, and when Clara's time came to an end, her clock was passed on to another, its pendulum still swinging, carrying not only her memory but his. So Grendale remained, a place where time moved differently. A place where every tick of every clock was a secret, a fragment, a reminder. And in that endless rhythm, Elias Wren, the clockmaker, kept his eternal vigil, not as a man, but as the breath of time itself.